This is episode 399 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm the president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, big report came out in the middle of last week from the Legislative Finance Committee, which I refer to as kind of the in-house think tank of the New Mexico legislature, which I don't have to remind our listeners is Democrat-controlled. The Legislative Finance Committee does a lot of good work, though. And
yeah, they're staffers. They are career bureaucrats, and they keep track of the numbers. But more importantly, a little bit like the Congressional Budget Office federally, they kind of say what's working and what's not. And yes, I think they, as government bureaucracies go, I think they do a pretty good job.
Yeah, I kind of put the GAO at the federal level as among the most worthwhile federal bureaucracies. Any GAO watcher or employee will say that their studies are often ignored by Congress and the White House, whoever is in the White House. And I fear that the Legislative Finance Committee's latest program evaluation, so they're evaluating something being done by the state of New Mexico. This one involves Albuquerque Public Schools. It is available on their website. It's probably a little easier to find it through errorsofenchantment.com, the Rio Grande Foundation's blog. We went and tracked it down for you. And it's, a 64-page report. It's not all that dense, but it is a very, very useful report discussing, quite frankly, when I talked to Bob Clark on the radio about it, he said, Paul, this report is kind of the sort of thing you would do at the Rio Grande Foundation in a lot of the things that you've said about APS over the years. And it's hard to disagree with that. So, it's good to see that we're not way off target when it comes to APS and its many challenges.
Yeah, and Paul, I have not looked at the report. I certainly looked at the link, but let me guess what's in it. Too big, too bureaucratic, and ineffective. I mean, that's kind of. What else is there?
You remind me of Kamala Harris now. Kamala Harris gets on these press conferences and looks like she didn't read the report. She was in sixth grade and maybe she skimmed a Cliff Note page or two. No, I'm just kidding, Wally.
I've not been called Kamala Harris this week until then.
This is the first. Maybe you could just officiate the governor's wedding. But
yeah.
There's a lot of what you say there. The big thing they really go into initially is APS has seen massive infusions of taxpayer dollars in recent years, both federal and state. They have seen massive decline in students. This all sounds familiar from conversations we've had on past podcasts. And they're really noting that there needs to be some common sense and systematic approaches taken by the district to merge classes, to shed teachers, not special ed. Special ed's in high demand and continues to be.
And not math and not physics. They're always hard to come by, but I bet there's some teacher categories that they have more than they need.
Yeah, and which is ironic because less than a year ago, and I found a report from August of 2021 saying APS is in a teacher shortage. Well, here we are in May of 2022, and now APS is talking about, or at least the LFC is talking about APS needing to shed teachers. Now, one thing they don't go into from kind of a big picture budget perspective, well, two things. One is they don't they analyze it on operating expenditures. We always take the top line budget, they spend X, and they have Y number of students. And we've looked at that, and that's derived, the $22,000 or so that they spend annually per pupil. APS uses the operating expenditures, but the point remains, that APS has a lot of room to reduce the amount it spends, the amount of resources that that are involved, because you're educating a heck of a lot fewer kids. They do not go into APS needs to close schools. I think they make a political calculation that they don't want to go there. And, look, the LFC does a lot of great work. The report is highly useful information. I do think that you have to have that tough conversation, especially when you're talking about old and outdated institutions that the district has. I mean, in my opinion, we talked about the most effective program in federal government, GAO. I would say that the most effective tool they've had to reduce federal spending in the last 50 years is the BRAC, base realignment and
that's
closure.
amazing. That's the same thing that
we're on a mind meld.
It's like, yes, we've done too many of these with 400 coming up. Yeah, it's such a tough political thing that no politician wants to be out in front of it. They want to depersonalize it or be one off from that activity. And right now we don't have a way to do that at APS, much less anywhere else in New Mexico.
Yeah, so the way a BRAC would work, or a APS BRAC, I don't know. We'd have to come up with a catchy name for it. But the BRAC works, and it came into being, actually. Rio Grande Foundation and I personally did quite an in-depth research report on what was Walker Air Force Base, and now is the Roswell Air Center. It's changed names maybe again, but it's the old Walker Air Force Base down in Roswell. Massive runways, massive facility. They put a lot of different things out there over the years, but that was a victim of pre-BRAC kind of base closures, where it's just presidents, and this is LBJ in the Vietnam era. To his credit, actually, far be it for me to offer praise for LBJ, but he was taking office and fighting the Vietnam War at a time where there was a massive overhang on the number of bases that were needed. And so,
unneeded bases, just they're in places, and they weren't strategically located, and they didn't have a mission concurrent with what they were needing to do militarily.
So he's ramping up Vietnam and the spending there, looking for ways to mitigate against the budgetary impact, and that's where he came down in terms of closing the bases. BRAC is a next generation way to close bases in a difficult political environment, where you name a kind of a non-aligned group of relative experts, as much as you can be on base closure, and you say, here are the goals of this BRAC. Here's how much we want to close from the different forces. Here's how much money we want to save. And then that commission comes up with them, the potential closures. They do it in a slate. So Congress really just has an up or down vote on that BRAC. And we've done like 4 of them over the years. We could quite frankly use another, from what I hear from folks, but not likely to happen anytime in the near future until we get a more fiscally conservative administration in Washington. So, we'll see if APS is willing to even embrace the LFC guidelines and recommendations. But that is not by any stretch the entirety of the report. There's a lot of other useful information, including for other districts across the state. Now, they do have a special section on the Cheryl Williams Stapleton situation. So
don't do that anymore.
Yeah, but it more involves audits and how they are undertaken, and where the resources are focused to really root out and hopefully eliminate fraud and abuse from, it's obviously not just Cheryl Williams Stapleton. It's other entities that within APS, other situations within APS.
Yeah, but Paul, if that can happen, the point is if that can happen there, is that the only time there's been fraud, abuse, and waste in Albuquerque Public Schools? The answer is probably not.
Absolutely. And, there's other again, useful information from this report. We've talked about COVID and the governor shutting students out of classrooms for a year. APS was, of course, a part of that situation. In fact, APS being union dominated and the old liberal school board that they had in place was, I'm not saying drag kicking and screaming to reopening, but they weren't exactly jumping up and applauding when the governor started reopening the schools finally after more than a year of being shut down. But the report has some excellent data showing how our children have been harmed and how they've lost academic performance. There's a component of reading, there's a component for mathematics, and they also break it out by low income versus non-low income. And there's a lot of those low income kids in New Mexico schools. And that means that a lot of those are Albuquerque Public Schools. And there's some real declines in performance. For example, something weird happened in school year 2021 where low income kids, they're taking these tests beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year. In 2021, student test numbers declined over the scope of the school year. Now, I don't know what 2021 specifically had to do with that. Obviously, kids were getting back into the classroom, but they went from 24% low income, 23% middle of the year, 19% by the end of the year. So whether APS can effectively teach low-income students is a serious question. That's in reading, but also mathematics, especially on the low-income side of things, real declines. And again, this is all, we took these charts and put them up over at errorsoфenchantment.com. So give you a chance to weigh in there, Wally, in terms of results at APS or the lack thereof.
Yeah, Paul, and it's kind of this whole argument about educational attainment and when it rears its ugly head as opposed to resources in, which APS doesn't do too bad on the resources in. It's on education out. It reminds me a little bit of, the right to work. The unions fight right to work like crazy, but in the states that have right to work, union membership goes up because there's more economic activity and more businesses done in the state. So much of what's happened in APS over the last, I don't know, my recent memory, I would say 20 years, has been so union driven. They've spent so much time fighting anything that calls into question any changes being made by the union, that's where all their resources go. If they would just embrace a few of these changes, I think it would be far better for the teachers union in the long run, and not that much worse in the short run. So we have a weird situation with what the teachers union stands for in across the country, but it certainly is a huge impact here on Albuquerque Public Schools.
Well, and the final point to discuss on this report, it dovetails perfectly with what you just said. The push for lower class sizes is something that's been undertaken at APS. It's been undertaken at the state level. It's been undertaken nationally, and it's been undertaken largely because the unions value that. They push for that. Unfortunately, a lot of parents mistakenly believe that lower class size, smaller class sizes are really an effective tool. This report throws some cold water on that idea and really says, look, if you are going to focus dollars, the first thing you do is content-focused coaching for teachers. And this is great. They actually do a benefit to cost ratio, and they put a dollar sign on it. It's amazing how rare this is in government, but they say $190. So you're getting a positive benefit of $190 for every dollar spent on teaching coaches or teaching teachers how to teach better in the content areas that they're involved in. Professional development on data-guided instruction. So we all saw, well, hopefully a lot of people saw Moneyball, famous movie that really revolutionized the way baseball strategy happen. Now, one could talk about the impact on the game and the pleasurability of watching it, but from an effectiveness and managing, it
Meaning
really
who
worked.
won?
Yeah, $132, using more data to guide instruction. Literacy consultants, $32. Tutoring by certified teachers, $15. More experienced teachers, $13. Now you get into class sizes. The most kind of beneficial area is in kindergarten. It's only $11, and it just drops from there. By the time you get to between fourth and sixth grades, dropping the class size by one student, $2. Now, one can argue with how they came up with these, but there is no question that the benefits are heavily concentrated in improving the quality of teachers. And then you have to retain those teachers as well, which is a separate issue. And again, the unions make that difficult because you can't pay the better teachers more money. You have to pay everybody the same because of the union contracts. But anyway, this report really has some useful data in that area.
No, and Paul, when you were talking about that, this is starting to get frightening, at least for me. I was thinking along those lines is just based on my own experiences. When I had great teachers in K through 12, even if the class was really big, that was so much better than having a lesser teacher, even in a small class size. And that's the case all the way from and me personally. So, yeah, I think there is some logic to that. The other thing is, Paul, is that, if a class size is 500, like a college freshman lecture, we're not talking that. We're already talking that the class sizes are reasonable. And so what are these impacts to make small changes? If we had 150 was the average class size, I bet the difference would be a lot better, a lot bigger. But, keep in mind, we already have reasonable class sizes across New Mexico in the overwhelming number of cases.
Yeah, and I don't recommend, Rio Grande Foundation doesn't write many 64-page reports, and I don't recommend a lot of people read those kinds of lengthy reports because I know it's just not realistic, but if you happen to have time to read one like that, that is a good one. And the concern and the question, as I alluded to at the beginning, is like the GAO's reports, like the Rio Grande Foundation reports, like the LFC zone reports, there's a challenge of actually getting the political actors to line up and do some of these things, because I know this is going to shock everybody listening to this podcast, but the political calculations of the legislature, the governor, school board candidates, etc., don't always line up with actually achieving maximum student outcomes. They tend to drift into more direct financial compensation and other political benefits. So I definitely think that this is a touchstone report that is worth looking at and hopefully getting some action on from all levels of government.
Yeah, and then the other issue is that there are probably school systems across the state that are maybe doing a little better than APS, and how do they rate on these metrics? So,
yeah.
But Paul, can you have a successful K through 12 education system in New Mexico if you lose Albuquerque Public Schools? Just by the numbers, I'd say the answer is no.
If you lose them, well, I mean,
if you lose in
if
APS,
you took them out of the statistical sample, I think we would go up.
Well, what I'm saying is,
right.
if APS is unsuccessful,
Yeah.
can the state as a whole be considered to have a
Very
successful
true.
educational system K through 12? And I think the answer is no.
Very true. And of course, many of these challenges and problems are not just related to APS. Most notably, the decline in the student population and all of the factors that creates inherently. Yes, a lot of students left during COVID. My family, my kids among them, and that was not unique to Albuquerque Public Schools. Birth rates are declining. Certainly, rural parts of New Mexico, overall populations are much more static than even the Albuquerque area. So, just because you live in another district, another part of the state, doesn't mean that this is not eminently relevant information for your schools and your community. So, speaking of bad politically driven policies, and I'll throw in a dash of hypocrisy here, Joe Biden and the Biden administration is seriously considering some form of student loan forgiveness. Now, this, of course, is higher education and college debt. The good news, I guess, such as it is that $50,000, which had been bandied about, so forgiving everybody's debt up to $50,000 has been taken off the table. Looks like there's at least serious consideration for $10,000 per student. But regardless, this is highly regressive policy, meaning that it benefits the wealthiest and, most politically connected, and it impacts negatively everybody else, whoever paid off their student expenses or student loans, the truck drivers, the plumbers, the other skills professions, the trades professions that by and large did not go to college and take out a bunch of debt. And then who really benefits the most? Of course, it's the institutes of higher education, government funded by and large, that are going to continue to cash checks from government at all levels and have very, very little accountability for the way they spend their money as prices rise and rise. There are certainly, I'm in favor, we would be in favor of getting rid of the federal student loan program as the number one tool for reducing the long-term price of a college education. But the idea of paying it off is it's insane.
Yes, and this is one of those where, the scariest word in the English language, according to Ronald Reagan, is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Just what this program has done in terms of increasing the cost of a college education. It's grown faster than inflation now for decades, while the effectiveness and the value of that education in terms of success and careers and the other things go down. And so, yes, this is a little bit like, remember in the 2008 time frame, there was quote unquote bailout of the auto industry, but it was really a bailout of the union. Well, this is not as much necessarily. Believe me, if you got $10,000 or $50,000 of loan forgiveness as a former college student, you are not going to be a sad person. You will be a happy person. But what the real bailout is the system of higher education, both private and public, I think. So,
yeah, and it really perplexes me the number of levels on which this is a regressive policy,
right?
And yet it continues to garner support from those who claim to be progressives.
Even the Bernie Sanders of the world love this sort of thing. So
and, yeah, it kind of leads me to believe that progressive really just means that you advocate for massive government expansion, with the exception of a few areas. So if you support more military spending, whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, that's not progressive. If you support more border enforcement, right, that's not progressive. Law enforcement, not progressive. But anytime you support, film subsidies, well, despite the fact that those benefit the highest earning corporations and some of the highest, most wealthiest people in the entire world, that's considered progressive, even here in a poor state like New Mexico. And, with free college already on the way for many New Mexicans, it strikes me as a double whammy of bad policy, because once you do this, you're going to probably see it done again and again over time. And finally, there was an analysis by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, and again, this is at heirsoфenchantment.com, who gets the most forgiveness? Because who has the most student loans? Most, as much as I can make fun of my own poli-sci major, it's doctors and lawyers.
Oh, interesting.
So
those poor doctors and poor lawyers that never get to make any money.
Yeah, and I, on one hand, and interestingly, there's already been significant benefits allocated to them because of the delays in the payments, the holidays, and
right.
Donald Trump set that up, at the outset of the pandemic. Good idea, bad idea. He is not above reproach. But at this point, as Biden continues to push back that day of reckoning for payments on student loans, it is already disproportionately impacting some of the very wealthiest people. Now, as a general rule, kind of setting this aside, I think we can all agree that society would like more doctors
than lawyers.
Not so much on the lawyer front, but either way, this is just a form of blind subsidization of whoever takes out massive debt, and it's just incredibly, incredibly bad policy. Now, a decision has not been made yet, but we shall see. Speaking of decisions that have not been made yet, Albuquerque City Council is looking at proposals to create some form of sanctioned homeless encampments. We're not super big fans of this, and there has been talk. The Albuquerque Journal noted in editorial, they said that this would be as many as 45 encampments. Right now, the zoning process is what they are looking at and considering some form of expansion of these encampments. We all want this homeless situation to be addressed. And if there is indeed some way that you can keep these people off the streets, off public rights of way, give them, 3 meals and some form of shelter in a secure way that they're not degrading the neighborhood around them, I am somewhat open to that concept. But we have a homeless encampment right now at Coronado Park, adjacent to downtown Albuquerque. I drive by it all the time. It is not secure. It's done nothing to get the homeless off the streets. And I really think that there is a reasonably derived lack of faith among people in Albuquerque about the seriousness of our elected officials, from the mayor to city council, in terms of actually addressing this problem. So it's going to be interesting what crops up at city council on these encampments.
Yeah, and Paul, right now, if you were to drive down Zuni from where it starts at Wyoming down to Louisiana, Pedro, San Mateo.
Central as well, yeah.
Yeah, there are homeless encampments right now. The bitter irony is one of the largest ones, where there's usually the most tents and the most people camping on the sidewalk, is right next to the tiny houses that were set aside for the homeless. So, one of the things is we have not seen a lot of success with what's happened to date, which definitely causes or should cause healthy skepticism. So, there's a lot of issues. So what do you have to do to be in these encampments? Can you openly buy and sell and do drugs? There's a whole host of things. What other activities are involved? And will it do anything positive for the homeless situation? So
and there needs to be, just as a baseline, a lot more education and communication and engagement with the community in terms of where these would be located. If you're doing 45 of them or even 15 of them, I would much rather see them try to actually make Coronado Park resemble what they say they want to do, advocates of this policy, before we embark on 2, 3, or 4 of these encampments, and really get some analysis done, because tiny homes, a lot of open space. I mean, it's a small facility, but
right.
the facility has not been full since it opened. Where are the homeless shelters in terms of their occupancy levels? Why are we not seeing homeless move there? Would enforcement, would a concerted effort to get them out, get homeless out of public rights of way and off of sidewalks, do more than these proposed encampments to address the problem? Because the absolute last thing I want is for a, quote, successful series of encampments to simply entice more homeless to come here to Albuquerque to set up camp, literally.
Yeah, and Paul, have they started to discuss the size of these 45 encampments in terms of the amount of?
They're small. They're
like acre, half acre, or do they?
I don't know physically on the size, but it's I think a couple of dozen, like 40-ish people or campsites. We're not talking maybe. And I don't know what Coronado Park has in terms of occupancy. There's a lot of folks down there camping out, though.
Yeah, and then are there 45 places you can put this without the voters and the neighborhood associations and everyone being up in arms? You know, you'd have to think that is a homeless encampment all that different than a methadone clinic or something like that, which is certainly not easy to locate formally in Albuquerque or anywhere else. So there are some issues with this, and then the question is what say does the neighborhood and the community have with regard to where these go? And if they don't have a lot of say, then are they going to be forced into areas? And yes, Paul, the homeless issue is it is profound. It's a disaster here in Albuquerque, and it's one of those solutions are tough to come by. So,
yeah, it's a thing that we would all like to solve, but I think there are a lot of red flags here. So we had an email alert, and folks can find that information if they're on our email list. You'll be alerted to that information. Because it is something that I think impacts the quality of life dramatically in our largest city. Now, change of pace in terms of going from a local to much more of a national and international issue, but very relevant to, again, all New Mexicans. Natural gas prices, once truly left for dead. Now, when prices of oil hit negative back in April of 2020, you were right on the mark in saying that this situation is not going to last. But a lot of folks said that natural gas prices would forever kind of be in the tank, so to speak. And now, guess what? Natural gas prices, we are back, baby, as they say. Just a few headlines here. CNBC, this is an article from today. Natural gas surges as much as 9% to highest level since 2008 as Russia's war roils energy markets. Now, don't be fooled. This is not the Putin price hike per se. There are, of course, issues relating to the war in Ukraine that are causing prices to increase. But the first is demand, simply, very plainly, a lot of utilities. And Barack Obama, none other than President Obama, celebrated the decline in American CO2 emissions because utilities were shifting over from coal to natural gas. Now, Fox News, just yesterday, U.S. suffers decline in natural gas production growth as countries seek Russian alternative. Now, why is the U.S. not able to produce as much natural gas as we were? And this story attributes the situation to a slowdown in lack of adequate pipeline infrastructure, which pipelines are by and large a federal thing that are regulated by the federal government. And
And for sure they are in New Mexico because,
Yeah.
I mean, there's always federal regulation, the pipeline themselves, but the right of way and the easements required for pipelines because there's so much Bureau of Land Management land. It's the state
Yeah.
and the feds are heavily involved in takeaway, at least in New Mexico. But guess what? New Mexico is a big producer of natural gas right
Yeah.
now. So
And this is all getting back to impacting New Mexico, both from a revenue perspective. And remember, natural gas price fluctuations and production fluctuations directly affects New Mexico in a way that is even more dramatic on a per dollar basis than oil production. But also, we who use natural gas stoves, natural gas water heating, obviously most of the home heating is done for the year, but energy, I think about 20% of New Mexico's electricity is produced through natural gas. And this is yet another example of the federal government not being serious about energy production. And of course, if we were really turning the spigots on, if we were generating or producing the kind of infrastructure, pipelines necessary, and LNG export terminals, we could have very favorable impacts on lowering prices, but also the international policy situation, geopolitical with Ukraine and Russia and Western Europe. So
yeah, and at the macro level, natural gas is the only fuel that is highly reliable, that is available for electricity generation. Coal plants are being shut down, and that pace is accelerating. Nuclear plants are being shut down, not because we want to, but they are at their design life, and at some point over the next 10 years or so, huge numbers of those will be shutting down. Just there's no alternative to it. So you're left with natural gas. And so,
Exactly.
it does seem like that is the only thing that's there for this quote unquote bridge to the future, because we're seeing, for lots of reasons, batteries, wind and solar. Yeah, they're good. They have a role. They're taking their place with the production of electricity in our country, but they're not going to be the answer completely for a long, long time to come. And so you're left with natural gas. And then I'm always harken back to
real quick, Wally.
Oh yeah, please.
We haven't seen. I know that the PRC said no to PNM when PNM was trying to replace San Juan Generating Station, and they were inclined to use a natural gas facility located in the Four Corners
Right.
to help address the shortfall
Right.
Of electricity because of the closure of that coal-fired power plant. Now, I would assume that if the PRC had been more, inclined to, once reports of those brownouts and blackouts came about, that they would maybe relent and say, okay, go ahead and build this natural gas plant up in the Four Corners to take advantage of Four Corners natural gas and all of the infrastructure, the grid already being up there. I haven't heard a peep out of on any of that. So is that to say that that's not going to happen? I mean, it's certainly the San Juan Generating Station closes in September of this year. So we're talking about really a year or so before people are really air conditioning their homes. I can't imagine you build a natural gas electrical generating power plant and locate it up there in that kind of time at this point.
Well, yeah, given the supply chain issues, yeah. Could we be in between a rock and a hard place? And just, PNM said that keeping San Juan open for those additional 3 months doesn't solve the problem a year from now. So what are they going to do? And then just to, kind of tie this all together, PNM and Avangrid still want to do their merger. So, I mean, it's getting to the point where reading between the lines, maybe that's the only thing that gets New Mexico out of this is to allow that merger. And then keep in mind that the current elected PRC goes away and there will be a new appointed one in the not too distant future. And so maybe the goal of the utility, PNM and Avangrid, is to just wait out the current this current set of 5 elected regulators and deal with 3 new appointed ones to have a plan for the future.
Yeah, just not a lot of radio silence there on that issue,
and then Paul. So and then when if there are blackouts and brownouts, what are we going to hear? Oh, nobody said there was a problem. It's like So it's one of those it's like Paul. It's a lot like the forest fires. It's easy to talk about the forest fires while they're burning. It's a lot tougher for people to take a look at the forest management problems the other 7, 8, 9 months of the year. And this is striking me as the same thing. Are we going to have what utility people euphemistically call electric appreciation days? Lots of blackouts and brownouts to have different policies done by those utilities and the regulators. We'll have to see.
Yeah. Final story here. Morning Consult, they're a polling company. They looked at all 50 states and the governor's approval or disapproval numbers. This is the one that Michelle Lujan Grisham is towards the bottom, not completely on the bottom, but definitely very near. She is polling better, according to Morning Consult, than Doug Ducey of Arizona, Tom Wolf of Pennsylvania, Evers from Wisconsin, Dan McKee of Rhode Island, David Ige of Hawaii, and Kate Brown of Oregon. So that's a bunch of Democrats and Ducey. The governor, as of right now, Lujan Grisham, 48% approval, 45% disapproval, which is among the very bottom. Now, the top performers, 11 straight Republicans, a lot of them Northeastern Republicans. We talked recently with Garrett Ballingy from West Virginia, and the famous video of the governor of West Virginia and his little bulldog there, or not so little bulldog, telling Bette Midler to kiss her hiney. Well, apparently that does very well in the polls because Justice is 65-27 in his polling. He's a Republican, by the way. The top polling Democrat, according to Morning Consult, is Andy Beshear of Kentucky. And Jared Polis, by the way, one of the better performers, 57-35. He's, of course, a Democrat from Colorado. So, this is, if you're looking at the governor's race, whoever's side you're on, this is a glass half full, half empty situation. If you're Lujan Grisham, you're saying, well, I still got a majority. You add a Republican name with actual policies and personality flaws, et cetera, and that may make them less popular. If you're a Republican, you're saying, well, if I can drag down her numbers a little bit, assuming this is all accurate information, we've definitely seen polling data come in as less than accurate in recent years. So we're assuming the validity of the data in the first place. I would say it's a safe bet that Lujan Grisham is among the less popular governors. Kate Brown, by the way, the least popular governor, a Democrat in Oregon, which Oregon has tended to be even more to the left than New Mexico, 41% positive, 54% negative. So that's that is one that you got to think Kate Brown. I don't know if she's got term limits or anything, but she's not going to be governor of Oregon for very much longer.
No, and then as you also need to look where they started from, and our Michelle Lujan Grisham, she won by a lot, in her first election. So she has gone down quite a bit. Is it going to be enough? And then who comes out to vote? It's always a question. And as you said, it's one thing to say, right now, it's kind of Michelle Lujan Grisham versus not Michelle Lujan Grisham. The Republicans will have a candidate here shortly, and we'll have to see how all that shakes out as well.
Yeah, and as of 2 days ago, as we would say on this podcast, Republicans were looking very, very good. Now, for winning a lot of seats in Congress and generally speaking, November. Now, the leaking of the Supreme Court expected decision on Roe v. Wade definitely will gin up a lot of the left-wing base and Democrat side of things, even if governors have relatively limited roles in abortion policy. Yes, New Mexico took a law off the books at the governor's behest, etc. But in case you're interested in more conversations about these and other issues, I recently interviewed Congresswoman Yvette Herrell. That conversation is available live at Tipping Point, New Mexico, or on our Facebook page and via social media, YouTube, etc. I'm also sitting down with several of the Republican candidates running for governor to challenge Lujan Grisham, and things are getting feisty in that race. Early voting at the clerk's offices starts a week from the recording of this episode, which is on May 3rd. So on May 10th, early voting at the clerk's offices, and then election day is June 7th. So we will have a resolution on the Republican candidate running to challenge Lujan Grisham in just over a month. So check out those conversations. I hope you find them enlightening. And thank you for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube and Rumble channels. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.